one of the most influential composers of the late 20th century. His rich body of work includes operas, his first being Einstein on the Beach, and classical pieces, such as Music in 12 Parts. But he has also found great success with his namesake ensemble and his film scoring work. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. On this episode of InnerVIEWS, our conversation with Academy Award nominee and Golden Globe winner, composer Philip Glass. When you're listening to music for enjoyment, do you hear it, you think, differently than the rest of us?
Well, how would I know? First of all, but I was always a listener too. My dad had a record radio shop. Right. It was more like a mom and pop record shop, downtown Baltimore, but and he listened to music, though he was not a musician, but he was actually a mechanic who used to fix cars, and then started fixing radios in the cars and began fixing radios, and then gave up the cars entirely, and then started selling records in the radio store, right? And at a certain point, the music had taken over the store.
So if he hadn't started with car radios, you may have been a mechanic today.
I doubt it. I would have found my way to music one way or the other. Really? I think music is, for the people for whom it is a lifelong passion or obsession, or however you want to call it. We start very young, and you tend to, and we don't retire. You do it as long as you can. I began playing when I was 6 or 7. I began listening to music with my father because he would bring records home. Because he didn't know anything about music, so he had to learn everything, and he did. By the time he really got to know classical music very well. But when he couldn't sell a record, he would bring it home because he thought if he listened to it, he could find out what was wrong with it. And then he wouldn't make the mistake of buying the wrong records because there was no record buyer in the store. He became the record buyer. But what happened is that he would bring home the modern pieces, and he would listen to them over and over, like Bartok, and I'm talking about the 1940s. Yeah. That was modern music then. And he listened to them, and then he began to like them. And then he became a kind of, a spokesman for modern music in Baltimore, I mean in the 40s and 50s. Yeah. And I remember people would come to this, he said, hey Charlie, take this record home. If you don't like it, you can bring it back. And he would give him Stravinsky and stuff like that, and Shostakovich. So he learned everything. He learned everything through, he couldn't read music. Later on, he wanted to play the piano, but it was too late. He couldn't even get his fingers into the keys right. Yeah. But I began listening with him. But I was also began playing at the same time. Now, the way musicians hear, I've come to see, what is this noise?
It's the music of the sound check at the stage outside, because you're at a music festival.
Okay. So the thing about the way musicians hear, I think we hear music in a different way. I've come to see that. But at first I didn't know that. How would I know it? Right. But I began playing when I was 6, 7. By 8 years old, I was at the Peabody Conservatory, which is a very good music school in downtown Baltimore. And I was playing flute, and then my second instrument was percussion. Both of those things helped me a lot later on, by the way.
Did your parents recognize something in you early on to know it was worth putting you into music?
Well, what they recognized was that I really liked music. But that didn't worry them too much because I also liked math and chess and other science and other things. But when I came home, I went to the University of Chicago when I was very young, and when I graduated, I was 19 when I graduated from there, and I told my mother that I was going to go to New York to study music. She was very distressed. Yeah. Because we had musicians in the family, but our family we were not a family that came out of classical music. We had relatives that were in vaudeville. Yeah. People who were playing in the Borscht Belt up in the Catskills in New York. To them, music was like maybe slightly better than the guy that parks your car.
Right.
You know, it was really not something that an educated person wanted to do.
But out of that background and with that family and in the time and date you were in, to gravitate toward what you're calling modern, what we think of as classical music.
You see, my father was on the other side of it.
Yeah.
He was a great proponent of modern music, and of course, by the time I was 15, I was away at school, but when I would come home, I became the record buyer for the store. By 15, I knew everything in the store.
Yeah.
And that also, the great thing about that was that I developed a love of all kinds of music.
The thing that I think is so right spot on about the story of your career is the fact of your love and aptitude for math. And I always think anybody who works in music must be good at math because it's so structurally based. Yet I meet so many people who aren't, that are in the music field. This is what I love about you.
Well, you might call it, I'm more inclined to call it arithmetic.
Okay.
Because it's not that, with arithmetic you can talk about structures. Like this famous piece, Einstein on the Beach, the people are singing numbers. The numbers they are singing are the structure of the music. So it became a way of my teaching people.
Pause, look up, stage for 3, head back and 4. Okay, try it.
They were mostly dancers, and some of them were amateur musicians, but they weren't really musicians. But I needed we need Bob Wilson and I were making this piece, and we need people who could sing. And so I taught them how to sing, and I taught them musical structure by using numbers. And I remember, so at the beginning, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1. That would be the lyrics would be the numbers.
Yeah.
And I remember one day Bob came in to a rehearsal. We had a music rehearsal, a dance rehearsal, and a stage rehearsal every day when we were building this piece. We spent about, I guess, 9 or 10 weeks. This was in 1976 when we were doing this. And Bob came in and heard these people singing these numbers. And he said, "Is that what they're going to sing?" And I said, "Yes."
It is now.
I hadn't thought of it, but of course, and it became a way for them to learn the structure of the music.
Yeah.
So that the piece was about 5.5 hours long. The people who sang probably had to learn a couple of hours worth of music. People who were not musicians. And we did it by using numbers. And we began using the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, what we call solfege. So I used those, those were how you got your pitches, and the numbers is how you got the rhythm. And I taught it that way. I wasn't a teacher, but I had the exercise was that I had people who could dance and could sing, but they had no training. When Bob and I started, our first company were talented people, but they didn't have that background. Later on, in other iterations of the piece, maybe in '94 and again in 2002 and so forth, we then had professional singers and
When you revisit a piece, and you just mentioned the other times that it's been performed, for you, do you then rework it in your head? Are you looking at a thing, or once you have performed it, it's what it should be?
Well, you know, I moved away. We performed the piece all through up until maybe 5 years or 3 or 4 years ago. It was always around about. It was the first tour was about. We did about 3 or 4 months, and then we didn't do it again. That was in '76 until '92, until '84, and then again in '92, and then again in 2002. So there were times when we weren't doing Einstein, but I had moved on to other things, but we always did Einstein. It was a piece that became. It was an important piece for both Bob and myself. We entered into the theater world and the world of opera and the world of music theater in an unmistakable way. I mean, when people heard that, they said, "Oh, it had to be those guys."
Yes.
So, and it was those guys.
Yeah.
So that was very important to me. But I didn't stick with as a musical language. It began to change almost immediately. And the kind of music that we're doing at this concert here is all kinds of music.
Do you like or dislike when someone refers to a style, that you have a certain style? Is that
Well, you know, that's an
restrictive?
interesting question, because the question of style is actually a crucial question, but not in the way that we mean it when we talk about a person's style. When I was studying in Paris, when I was right after I finished at Juilliard, and not quite right after, but I went to Paris to study with a very famous teacher named Nadia Boulanger, a wonderful teacher. And I went there to basically to learn everything about harmony and counterpoint that I hadn't learned at Juilliard, which was a lot, by the way. Juilliard was a great place, great students and a great faculty, but we didn't do a lot of the technical things. You were supposed to pick it up somehow. So after I finished Juilliard, I went to study with this paragon of music, Nadia Boulanger. And what I learned from her, now this is the most, I don't know if you meant to bring this up, but I began to, after I've been with her several years, I began to understand that style, personal style, is a special case of a general technique. If you put it that way. Now let's say we were a painter. Now, and you work with just black and white. That would be, let's say, your style. But that would also be the technique that you had chosen to work in. You could have used colors, but you use black and white. So you can say that when I say style is a special case of technique, that gives you, you can see what I mean when I say that. Mm-hmm. Same thing happens in music. So when you talk about a style, it's related to your abilities to understand the mechanical and technical aspects of music. So it's actually a very deep question. Yeah. Now the interesting thing is that for many of us, whether you're a writer or a painter or even someone who does interviews like this, like you have a style and you have a technique of your own. Of course you do. You have to. This is how you organize your intelligence to approach a subject. The interesting thing that happens for artists is that they are looking for a voice. It seems that unless you have a voice that people recognize, no one will know who you are. So as a young painter or writer or musician, you're going to look for a style that will be yours. Right. But actually that's not the problem. The real problem is we will find a personal style. It happens, I wouldn't say automatically, but by the time anyone is close to 30, they will have arrived there. If you begun, I began when I was 6 or 7. I mean, that's a lot of years. Yeah. It takes that long in a certain way. But once you've arrived at that style, the problem is you have to get rid of it. Because if you don't get rid of it, it's like you're wearing the same shirts that you wore when you were 25 years old. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't do that. Everything's, you continue to grow, you continue to change. The way you think continues to change, and the way you write music will continue to change. So when someone talks about a style, very often, for a long while, people thought it would be something like Einstein with the numbers. But then later on, I was doing film music, and they thought it was maybe like the hours, a kind of more lyrical, but a very lyrical version in a certain way, and a development from that.
Did you find success, though, forces you to stay within a certain boundary that you have become to be expected to do? So,
well, I never accepted that. So I didn't. Fortunately for me, I wasn't. I was discovered in a certain way when I was 36 or 37 with Einstein, but no one paid any attention to me really until I was 50 or 60. I mean, basically. To put it another way, I thought I was successful when I was 32 because I had an ensemble. I could go out and play. I could do concerts. The concerts didn't attract a lot of people. At first, I can remember my first concert, there were 6 people. And one was my mother. So does that make it more or I don't know. Right. But there it was. And she came up from Baltimore to hear this concert. I had a glass, and she came, I was playing in Queens College, and she walked in this big auditorium. I had somehow got a hold of it for the afternoon, and there were 6 people in the audience, and she looked up. What did she think? Now, here, that was in, let's say 70, maybe 71 or 72. By 76, she took the same train ride. This time she went to the Metropolitan Opera House. It was full.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what do you what was she thinking? I mean, I never, once you lose your parents, there are so many things you want to ask them. I said, I want to say, we sometimes call her Ida or Mom, Ida, what did you think about that? I would have liked to have heard, but I never asked her because somehow we never talked about that. At that point, I had gone to New York, and she said when she was so dismayed that I was going to go to music school, she thought I was throwing my life away. And then a few years later, she came to hear what I was doing, and there were 6 people in the audience.
And
then,
she knew you had thrown your life away.
But then she came up
Yeah.
later, and so she came up with my brother Marty, and he came with it, and there were people out scalping tickets, and she said, Marty, go out and see what they're buying them for.
I want to take you back to Paris, the time in France, because at the time you're there, there's also a lot going on in the Parisian film world, and Paris film is very different. It's changing. You get involved in that, see that, witness it. Does it change you musically, seeing what they're doing?
It did, in many ways, because one of the things, my problem, not just mine, but was how was I going to make a living at this? Now, when I was in Paris, I had a Fulbright scholarship, which was extremely small amount of money, but very, very prestigious to have a Fulbright to Paris. No question, it was important. And I stayed. I had some money from. I had some money from some jobs I had been doing in New York, and I was able to stay for more than over 2 years. I stayed into the third year. Yeah. And what I began to do is I began to look around for ways of making money in Paris. And I got involved with the film world, but not in the way that you would think. I was doing the doublage. You know what that is? Dubbing.
Oh.
When you put the words, and there were Americans around, and they were hired to put the words to do the dubbing. You put the words on the lips of the actor. Now there's a whole technique of doing that, which I learned, because I was a terrible actor, but people liked me, so I would get a one-line job, which means all I had to look like it was, maybe I was the guy in the operator, I was the operator in the elevator who said going up. I couldn't even say that line. They had to do so many takes. Only after a while they wouldn't even bring me back anymore. So I began to write the scripts, and I began to work with I began to see how language is synchronized, how you see it, and then later on I began to, when I was working with films of Cocteau, I was taking those films and turning them into operas, and I was using the very same techniques that I had done when I was a kid of maybe I was 28 or 29, and by then I was in my 50s, and I realized that I had all this training about synchronizing music and words. I began doing operas early on, but what I learned from working with film was that kind of really, in a funny way, when I was doing it, wasn't aware that I was learning anything. I was just making, if I made 75 francs for a day, that was good. In those days, that would have been $15. Yeah. But $15 in the 70s in Paris, you could eat dinner for 3 or 4 francs. So
you're doing well.
It was a serious amount of money to make.
What then takes me to is your love or understanding or appreciation for Indian music, and where that came from, how you worked into that area.
Well, that was, you and I have been talking a little bit before about accidents and chance, and this is a very good example of chance. A friend of mine was working as a photographer on a film, English guy, and he did the setup so that if they had to go back and redo they would have a record of it. And I was Ravi Shankar was hired to do some film music. I had no idea who he was. He hadn't met the Beatles yet, so we didn't know. No one knew who he was. But very soon after that, we did know. Within 2 or 3 years after that, he met George Harrison, and he got involved with all this other stuff. But at that time, he hadn't. He was a very famous Indian musician, but unknown to us. And I knew nothing about Indian music, and I got the job of being his assistant. And he was a wonderful man. And by the way, I stayed in touch with him for the rest of his life. What I had to do, this was the really tricky part. He was going to play it on the sitar. I had to write it down in such a way that the French musicians, we had a little orchestra, maybe 8 or 10 people, they had to play it in a way that he recognized that it was correctly notated. Now, the difficulty wasn't the pitches, the difficulty was getting the emphasis on the melody.
Right.
The arrival of an exotic music of that kind had not happened yet. It did happen very soon after that.
Right.
And in a funny way, I ended up being a participant in that because I became his assistant, and I solved that problem, by the way, just again by chance. I was looking at his percussionist who played the tabla, the hand drum, and I would write the music down, and the orchestra would play it, and Ala Rocca, he said, no. And he said, no. He said, the rhythm was not right. I couldn't get the rhythm right. And I was looking at it, and then very soon the French musicians, God help me, they began kibitzing, to say, no, do it this way, do it that way. And then, it was turning into chaos. Now, it was the first day of our working together. It was the first hour, and I knew that if I didn't solve this immediately, I was going to get fired, right? So, and I was desperate. I looked at the score, and I did an extraordinary thing for the time. I erased all the bar lines. And I erased the bar lines, and then I was looking at a stream of notes that weren't divided up the way we do it in the West. And I saw it in a different, and I said, oh. And I saw that it was just by observation and by chance that I saw that. If I hadn't erased the bar lines, I wouldn't have seen it. I didn't know a thing about what a tal is, which is the way you describe a rhythmic unit would have been a tal. There can be a tal of 16 notes, a tal of 12 notes, a tal of 7 notes. And whatever that tal was, that would repeat itself. And I looked at this and I saw almost immediately that it was a tal of 16, but I didn't know that was what it was called. But then, so I put a 1 bar line every 16 notes. And then I gave it to the players, and we played it, and Ala Rocca said, because Ala Rocca kept saying, he said, no, all the notes are the same, the notes are the same. And then I erased the bar lines, gave the music out, and he said, the notes are the same. And I was able to get that flow of music out of these French musicians who none of us knew anything about Indian music, but by this accident or fate or something, I had figured that out. I hadn't read any books about Indian music. Well, there weren't any books around at the time. Right. I became very friendly with. I was able to stay on the job. I worked all the way through the film. I even wrote a little. But every time he needed something really modern, like a scary part of the movie, he said, "Philip, you do this one." And I would sit down. There was an organ there, and I would do some really crazy thing. But then I got to. I kept in touch with him. I would go to. He was playing very soon after that. I decided my time in Paris was over, and I wanted to go to India. Just before we left, I bought a little transistor radio. I said, you know what? I want to hear the music all the way through. So every day I listened to the music, and I would say, we counted the distances in kilometers. I say every 100 kilometers, which is not very, 60 miles, I was hearing local music. Every 100, 200 kilometers, I could hear the change in the music.
Today, though, would we still find the difference along the path, or have we become so homogenized? There's so much marketing and stuff gone into it.
Yeah, that even if the world was much more pacified than it is today, you're quite right that the distinctness of the culture might have become more blurred. But at the time that we went,
each one was
I could hear it. Yeah. And by the time we got to India, it was an amazing education. And I did it with a little radio, a radio traveling across in buses and trucks. And
Do you find today that the audience has changed also? Do you think how they hear what you're doing, what others do?
Yes, they do. And it's interesting. What's interesting now, especially young people like this music a lot. You know, they like the music, especially that I wrote when I was the age that they were. And I still play the music because the music has changed a lot. I've done film music since then. I've done operas since then. I've done many symphonies and all kinds of things. But there is something in the music that tips people off that it's me. I don't know what it is, because I don't try it. It's not the kind of thing you try to do. If you tried to do it, you wouldn't be able to get it right. It'd be trying to match up socks in a drawer and you can't see the socks. You know, there's no way to do it. It's impossible. But if you don't know what you're doing, you'll get the right socks every time.
Yeah. Well, I think you do know what you've been doing. You've been doing it wonderfully for so many years. I can't thank you enough for taking the time here at a concert to sit in a trailer and chat with us about your life and career.
I'm happy to talk with you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Philip Glass. If you would like to learn more about our guests or watch other episodes of Interviews, visit our website at houstonpublicmedia.org/interviews.